Mars conjunctions with every classical planet. Now, before we take a step further, the airline insists that you buckle your seatbelts because Mars is a malefic and we're not going to pretend that it isn't. So don't expect a bunch of rosy, smooth sailing interpretations from Mars conjunctions. And you know what? Don't be afraid of that. What's this? This is delicious. Would you eat it? Would you gobble it up? I would. What's this? This is really dangerously spicy. Would you want to gobble that up? Who cares? Why am I talking about food all of a sudden? Well, because this is your chart. And this is an ingredient in your chart, like a Mars conjunction with something else. You get it? So don't be scared of the spice that is in the ingredients list of your recipe. So with that said, let's have a quick overview of what Paladipika 18.3 is saying about Mars's conjunctions with every other classical planet. If you have Mars with Mercury, you're cunning. If you have Mars with Jupiter, you're commanding. If you have Mars conjoined Venus, you are passionate. And if you got Mars and Saturn conjoined, you are crushing. Two malefics. What about Mars and the Sun and Mars and the Moon? Those were covered in the previous two verses, but we'll also re-include that stuff here. So if you have Mars with the Moon, you're really desirous. And if you have Mars with the Sun, you're so commanding that you're kind of militant. Now, as I said, these are the spicy bits for most of these things. Don't be scared of the spice in the recipe, but still, to understand what's ticking, let's go directly and look at the source text and then pick it apart one by one. Mars conjoined the careful Mercury. Your cunning intellect affects the roots and branches of how you do business and show affection or friendship. So you wind up in many fights. If you have Mars conjoined the respected Jupiter, then you're a leader, maybe even the ruler of a city or like a kingdom. Or you might be a wealth-seeking priest. If you have Mars conjoined the Asura-adored Venus, then you are an expert in sports and also security, like enforcing security. But you're passionate for other lovers and you're competitive and risky like a gambler. Finally, if you have Mars conjoined the Sun's son, Saturn, you are a pain knower, a false vower, and a derider. Spicy stuff. Let's look at each one by one, and we also won't forget to include a review of Mars with the Moon and Mars with the Sun. Mars conjoined Mercury. Your cunning intellect affects the roots and branches of how you do business and show affection and friendship. And that's why you wind up in many fights or many battles. What's ticking? What's the heartbeat behind this interpretation? Mercury is the planet of intellect, and Mars is the planet of motivation. If you have a combination of intellect and motivation, then you have a highly motivated intellect. Your intellect works well for figuring out how to get you what you want. That's what we mean by cunning. And that affects certain things that are related with Mercury especially. So Mercury has to do with commerce, so that cunning intellect is going to be especially good for business. So Mars Mercury is pretty good for business because it gives you that selfish edge, which is good in business. But Mercury also represents friendship and relationships in general. So the cunning intellect also affects how you show affection. You show affection with motives. I know you're not a bad person, but this might be a part of the recipe whose final taste might not taste that much like this, but this is one of the ingredients in your recipe. Who else has Mars-Mercury combos besides maybe you? Tom Selleck, Rosario Dawson. Salvador Dali, very passionate mind. Richard Nixon, wow, very crafty. Crafty is a synonym for cunning. Iggy Pop, very martial in how he's expressing himself and using physically how he looks, very mercurially Mars. And George Foreman, a lot of fighting, many battles. Mars conjoined Jupiter. You're a leader. You lead people. You might be a mayor or a president or something. Or you might be a wealth-seeking priest. So what's going on here? What's ticking behind this? Well, Jupiter is the planet of guidance or counsel, and Mars is the planet of command or dominance. So if you put the two together, you get well-counseled command. In other words, you're an effective leader. A king has command and good counsel. That's what makes an ideal king. But the other possibility here is a wealth-seeking priest. And mind you, priests are not supposed to seek wealth. So how would you know which side of this coin to expect in a chart? Look at which planet has the greater strength or dominance in the chart. If Jupiter is the more dominant planet when it's conjoined Mars, then you probably have leadership of the city, because the good counsel is the dominant part, and then it's affecting how you lead. But if the converse is true in the chart, Mars is the dominant one, then expect the wealth-seeking priest, because the dominant thing is motivation or selfish motivation, and then that's affecting your way that you guide people, the way that you act like a priest. Who are some people with Jupiter-Mars conjunctions? Well, again, Richard Nixon. His Mars-Mercury conjunction is within 1 degree, and his Mars-Jupiter conjunction is in 3 degrees, so you would interpret him mostly as a Mars-Mercury person. Also, there's these 3 people who you might not even know who their names are. In fact, I'm going to have to look, but they're extremely good examples of Jupiter-Mars conjunctions, especially this idea of wealth-seeking priest and what it usually means in this day and age when priests don't really play a very dominant role anymore. So these 3 people from left to right are Jerry Yang, Jimmy Wales, and Paul Durov. But still, who is that? Well, Jerry Yang is a co-founder of Yahoo. Jimmy Wales is the co-founder of Wikipedia. And Paul Durov is the founder of something called VK, which is the Russian version or the Russian alternative of Facebook. These 3 people really illustrate what it means to be a wealth-seeking priest, because what is the priest really? The person who provides information and guidance. Yahoo, it's a search engine. You're looking for information. Wikipedia, it's an encyclopedia. You're looking for information. VK, it's a social networking site. You're looking for information about other people. And all these people have figured out how to make money and turn it into a business. Mars conjoined Venus. Expert in sports and security, passionate for other lovers, competitive, risky gambler. What's going on here? Why is he saying this? Why does Paul Deepica say this about the Mars-Venus conjunction? Well, Venus is a lot like Jupiter. It's the planet of knowledge or expertise. And Mars is to do with strength and force. So if you conjoin Venus and Mars, one of the things you expect is an expert in the use of force. A person who's very knowledgeable about how to use force. So maybe they're very good at wrestling, or they're very good at sports, boxing, anything, any kind of sports or contest. Or maybe they're very good at enforcement. That's what I mean by security, like police officers, security officers, and so forth. Now, Mars is also the planet of passion and motivation, right? And Venus is the planet of love and affection. So if you're putting the planet of passion conjoined with the planet of love, then you're going to get a lot of passion. But because of the self-motivated nature of Mars's ambition, it's kind of self-gratificatory passion. So that's why he expresses it as passion for other lovers. Very similar to when Mars moved with Mercury, there was selfishness in how friendship is established. With Mars and Venus, it's selfishness in how romance is established. Like I said, I know you are not an evil person, even if you have Mars and Venus. That's just like I know that paneer curry is not going to burn my throat when I eat it, even though it has hot chili in it. What about this bit of being a gambler, competitive and risky? Well, Venus is the planet of luxuries and wealth, and Mars is the planet for ambition, highly motivated. So the person is very ambitious for wealth and luxury. So they'll really be out there fighting and trying to get wealth, and not because Mars is very brave and bold, they're not going to be very cautious. So they'll be risky and kind of involved in gambling. Look at some of these people with very tight Mars-Venus conjunctions within 3 degrees. Dean Potter, wildly risky sports. Amy Winehouse, extremely passionate, extremely risky. The Rock, excellent in wrestling, excellent in sports, excellent with muscles, etc. Adolf Hitler, extremely ambitious, extremely risky. Mars conjoined Saturn. A pain knower, false vower, and a derider. This is the hardest one to swallow, if this is in your chart, because it's the conjunction of a malefic with the other malefic. So it's not going to be rosy. So remember the recipe analogy. What is the reasoning for saying this about the Mars-Saturn conjunction? Well, Saturn is very critical and Mars is very commanding. You put the two together and you get a derider. Someone who can just crush and criticize, reduce something else to dust by their analysis and their just attack. Mars is also the planet of injury, and Saturn is the planet of illness. And that's one of the things that he means by a pain knower. You know pain because you have Mars and Saturn conjoined. You're very likely to suffer in some way or another. Another meaning of pain knower is one who dispenses pain because of the commandingness and the criticalness of Mars and Saturn. So it's also good for enforcers, one who dispenses punishment. And then the false vower thing. Mars is the planet of ambition and motivation, self-motivation. And Saturn is the planet of vows, things which last a long time. So a person with a Saturn-Mars conjunction is said to be a false vower. They make a promise because it's self-serving. So once it ceases to be self-serving, they release the promise. They don't do it anymore. Again, I know you're not bad, even though you have a Mars-Saturn conjunction. Or you might be a terrible person. But that would not just be because you have chili in your curry. It's because you put too much chili in your curry. Some people with Mars-Saturn conjunctions: Pablo Escobar, a pain dispenser and also a false vower, and also a derider, defier. Axl Rose, a pain knower for sure, a false vower for sure, a derider for sure. Not a singer, he's a great singer. That doesn't have to do with Mars Saturn. This is the chili part of the recipe. There's other stuff in the recipe that makes him a singer or a good looking or something like that. Tom Waits, a derider, a pain knower. Helena Blavatsky, the founder of the Theosophical Society, whose integrity is quite questionable. Mars conjoined the moon. I summarize it as stimulated desires, which doesn't sound too difficult. But let's have a look at the Sanskrit and see what is really being said about this. Kuta stri asava kumbhapanyam ashivam matu. Stri means women, and kuta means crafty or secret. So what this implies is that the Mars-Moon conjunction indicates being involved with crafty women. So that means like insincere women or calculating women, or secret women, which means women you really probably shouldn't be involved with, maybe affairs or things like that. So this makes sense, unfortunately, because that's what Mars is all about. It's about independence, not cooperation, not partnership. It's about me. So when it is conjoined with the planet of desires, then the desires become pretty selfish and independent and don't really naturally seek to fulfill themselves in cooperation with others. Then there's the word asava, which means stimulation. So that also just makes a lot of sense because Mars is the planet of strength and the moon is the planet of desire. So Mars conjunction with the moon strengthens or stimulates the desires. Asava also means liquor, which is interesting because liquor and partying is a result of having kind of overly stimulated desires and also results in that. The word pani means to drink. And so here we get the sense of being a drinker of liquor. But panyam also means to buy and sell. So here we get a sense of somebody who sells liquor. In other words, somebody who kind of entices women to be crafty, who entices people to be overstimulated. Or maybe we can also see a connection between the crafty women and the buying and the selling. And here's somebody who tends to see sex as a commodity. Now, we have the word kumbha, which people think means a pot or something. But kumbha has a lot of interesting meanings based on the fact that it means being closed in or keeping to yourself. One of the meanings is being a very selfish man. So kumbha refers to licentious men, or playboys, we sometimes call them. Kumbha also refers to money, what you're keeping to yourself, what you're hoarding. So now we can see this word in connection with panyam. It's like buying and selling to the licentious men or buying and selling the licentious men. So again, it's like sexuality as a commodity and also a lot of interest in like financial trading because of the heightened desires. Finally, Paldipika wraps this conjunction description up with another concept, which is Ashiva Matu. Mata is mother, and Ashiva means unpeaceful, or without peace. So again, this is actually just a simple derivation of the fact that the moon represents mother and Mars represents war. So the Mars-Moon conjunction signifies some type of conflict with or in the mother. So maybe the mother is very unpeaceful because the child is not very demure, or maybe the mother is very troubled and that's why the child doesn't develop in a kind of socially normal way. Or maybe the native and the mother very often fight with each other and they don't have peace between each other. To put a face on this combo, Angelina Jolie, Kylie Minogue. Mars conjoined the Sun. This is supposed to indicate discipline, enforcement, and military. The actual wording is very short. Agha Rata. Agha means to hit. Rata means to enjoy. It's very similar to the modern idea of the Fight Club, or that saying of like enjoying a good whipping. It's the finding of enjoyment in hitting things or even being hit. So is this really bad? It's not necessarily bad. It maybe isn't necessarily good either, but it's kind of just naturally Mars, right? The reason is that the Sun is a fiery planet and Mars is just like that. Mars is also a fiery planet. So when Mars comes close to and conjoins the Sun, what you're getting is the fiery Mars that's very masculine coming close to the fiery Sun that's very masculine. And so the interpretation is just the amplification of all that masculinity. So we can say in English, Mars conjunction with the Sun indicates a strong, forceful, conflict-ready individual who is capable of regulating and punishing others. So before we stop talking about these conjunctions, I want to mention 2 or 3 very important points. First of all, don't over-include, don't be over-inclusive. A conjunction that is just in 2 planets in the same sign but very far apart is not really at all the same as a conjunction that is very, very close together and tight. I would expect a tight conjunction to produce much more prominent effects than the loose conjunction. So you might not even see much effect from a very loose conjunction. Even tight conjunctions that span over a sign border get loosened a little bit by that border. Another thing that I mentioned already, but I want to kind of highlight right now, is not to whitewash this. In other words, don't think that you can just take any description out of the box and use it as a real interpretation for a real person. Specifically with conjunctions, you have to look at two things at least. One is the sign that it occurs in, and the other is the house that it occurs in. The sign that it occurs in will have a huge effect on the dignity of the conjuncted planets. And so therefore it will have a big effect on how dignified or undignified you should frame the interpretation. For example, a Moon-Jupiter conjunction in Cancer is really not at all the same flavor as a Moon-Jupiter conjunction in Capricorn. There's the same basic dynamics happening, but the twists or the permutations or the versions of them would be either dignified or undignified. Similarly, you always have to look at what house the conjunction is occurring in. That will show you what part of the stock interpretation to highlight and versus what other parts to downplay. And will also show you what area of life this conjunction affects the most and primarily. So a Jupiter-Moon conjunction in the 9th house will really give the sense of being like a community leader, a guide. Whereas the same Jupiter-Moon conjunction, even in the same sign, but in the 6th house, will have a different sort of sense. It will be more about advising people how to be street smart. I hope that you got a lot out of this video and you get a lot out of this video, because I'm sure it can stand up to a whole bunch of rewatches. If you like this kind of presentation that I'm giving, I bet you would really like my report on your birth chart. And if you're interested in that, please go to my website, victorcara.com, click on the readings button, and then you can see the menu of what I offer there.